And I think that cultural diplomacy recently became much more important, which I think is linked to the rise of the concept of soft power in the international political discussion. This term was coined by Joseph Nye, and this describes the ability to achieve goals through attraction rather than coercion. And if you want to attract people, all these cultural things, I think, play a very important role. And finally, there's also the citizens of each country. And they all can become ambassadors in today's interconnected world. Because of the globalization and for the last 30 years or so, traveling became much cheaper. People so traveled more often. And also we have now new communication technologies, the internet, telephone. And this all makes it easier to connect with people worldwide. Facebook now has 500 million users in the world. Same with Twitter. And some foreign ministries already apply social networking in their outreach strategies. There's one example from the, I think, US Embassy in Jakarta, which has tremendous big number of fans on Facebook. And they quite successfully use Facebook in their public diplomacy outreach. But I think the most important issue about social networking and the internet is that you don't need a big machinery behind you, like the US State Department or other big institutions, to become an influencer. Today, every single person is just a mouse click away of the great powers. And we've seen some examples in the past where small groups or even individuals started big social movements just by using the internet and by using Facebook and other social networking tools. So all these different stakeholders influence the image that we have of a particular country. The question, however, I think, is, are they all aware of their influence? Do they use it responsibly? Do they want to be ambassadors of the country, and should they be ambassadors of the country? For example, if you take the business case, some businesses may not want to be associated with a particular country because it can have a negative impact on their business. In 2005, when the Muhammad cartoons were published in Denmark, that sparked a wave of violent protest against Danish companies and Danish institutions in the Arab world. And there are figures from one Danish company which said it had lost 1.3 million euros every day as a result of these boycotts. And also, other companies argue that they are global brands, not national brands. So they may, have originate from Germany, but they may sell most of their products in another part of the world. And I think this is a very legitimate argument from the business side. And in fact, there are only very few cases where businesses are really tied to a country. They can easily relocate when they think that at another place in the world there are better conditions for them to do their business. So companies can be quite unreliable ambassadors for this reason, because they have different loyalties to different regions and countries. And there are similar problems with when it comes to leveraging civil society in public diplomacy. First of all, it's very difficult to define what civil society is. There are hundreds and thousands of groups in every country which represent civil society, but none of these groups is really representative of the country as a whole. The biggest civil society groups in many countries are churches and unions, but although they have still a very large membership base, their membership base is actually decreasing over the past few years, and I expect that this trend will continue. So it's very doubtful whether we should really focus our public diplomacy effort on these institutions, which are still large but actually shrinking. So the conclusion from this is that still the state is the most important representative of a country. And I would argue that this is not necessarily bad. If you've got a parliamentary democracy, the parliament is usually a reasonably representative force of the society as a whole. Also, you've got associations, civil society groups, and corporate interests, and they all assure that there's a constant dialogue between the executive and the legislative branch and the society, so that there's a constant dialogue about the country's goals, both domestically and abroad. And there's one important thing which also makes the state so essential in this process, which is the state cannot leave the country. It's tied to this country. It's tied to the state is only powerful when it has control over the territory and when it is supported by the constituents in this country. And this is why I think the state still should play a very important role in this public diplomacy outreach. However, of course, the role of the state has changed over the past years, and it has become less dominant in international affairs. And this has been most vividly described by Anne-Marie Slaughter, who now heads the policy planning department at the US State Department. And she wrote in a recent article in Foreign Affairs that the emerging networked world of the 21st century exists above the state, below the state, and through the state. In this world, the state with the most connections will be the central player, able to set the global agenda and unlock innovations and sustainable growth. And I think this is a very important point that she makes here, that today a state has to become a connected state in order to be successful. So the state has to reach out to non-state actors in order to solve the problems that we face today. And if you think, for example, of climate change, it's obvious that some international or intergovernmental conferences cannot solve the problem. The way how we can solve global warming rests on the actions or non-actions of millions and billions of people all over the world. Every individual is responsible for solving global warming. So, having said this, governments still play an important role, but they need to change the way they conduct their business. The new public diplomacy will not only rest on diplomats, they will also rest on companies, civil society organizations, and individual citizens. And the question is, how can this new public diplomacy be steered and managed effectively? And I would argue that the best way to do this is a public-private partnership, a foundation whose purpose is the conduct of public diplomacy. And this public-private partnership should be independent of government, should include all other actors as well, but nevertheless, it should be closely interconnected with the overall foreign policy strategy of a country. Such a public diplomacy foundation, as I would imagine it, would be a grant-making institution. So everybody, from schools to government agencies, NGOs, or individual persons could apply for a grant with a concrete proposal for a public diplomacy project. And the projects could include a joint school book with another country, a film about immigrants or diasporas, a theater play, or a scientific conference. Then a joint committee of individuals from government, business, civil society would review the applications and decide which projects will get funding. And one important thing when you come to this decision would be how sustainable are these projects? Will they be able to stand on their own feet one day? And this has been described by two researchers, Alex Evans and David Stevens, who said that instead of behaving like a bank manager with a large portfolio, low-risk appetite, and a desire for incremental returns, the new public diplomat acts like a venture capitalist, focusing on a smaller portfolio, tolerating risk, and aspiring to achieve transformational change. And I think this is also where we should look at when we look at these projects. Which of these projects really have the power, the ability to transform public diplomacy? Apart from funding these different projects, I think the foundation should also be active in three other very vital areas of public diplomacy, which are very important. And these are evaluation and research, training, and strategy. First, evaluation and research. In Germany, but also in many other countries, there's currently a lack of research on public diplomacy, how it works, how it affects the images that we have of a country, and so on. The foundation should therefore also provide funding for research, which can help Germany or any other country really to conduct their public diplomacy effectively, and it should also develop tools for evaluating the project that it's funding. Now, obviously, it's quite difficult to evaluate these projects because sometimes and often public diplomacy involves changes of opinions and behavior which we cannot really observe in a short period of time. And even if we can observe them, it's very difficult to find, as you said, the link. So what is the causal relationship between project A and the change of behavior or opinion? But there's currently research going on about these issues, and I think the foundation should build on this and expand this research further. So there's one nice quote I found by Nicholas Kall, who's also in the advisory board of the Association for Place-Building and Public Diplomacy, and he said about evaluating cultural diplomacy: attempts to evaluate cultural diplomacy can seem like a forester running out every morning to see how far his trees have grown overnight. So often we will speak about incremental change, but still we should continue to develop means to measure these incremental changes. And second, there's training. If we want everybody to be a diplomat, then we also should the training that it needs to become a diplomat. So the foundation should offer training with regard to project management, performance measures, PR, and other techniques that the people who make these projects actually need to do them successfully. And beyond that, the foundation should also explore whether these trainings and courses can be expanded to people who go abroad for a long period of time, be it managers, be it diplomats, or aid workers, etc. So they could offer courses on cultural issues, language trainings, etc. And all these activities could be an additional source of funding for this institute, and they would also ensure that the project it's funding are actually effective. And third, there's strategy. Very often, public diplomacy is only used to boost the country's image, which is a very short-term goal. But I would argue that image and reputation are not ends in itself. If you earn a reputation, you want to do something with it. And it's very difficult also to have this high level of reputation being maintained over a long period of time. If you think, for example, of the BP oil spill, for years now BP has been trying to convince us that that BP stands for Beyond Petroleum, but we can clearly see that it's still an oil company, and that it has continued to drill for oil in ever more insecure places, and all the reputation that it has gained over the years are now gone for the foreseeable future. And there's another lack between rhetoric and action in the United States, between the freedom agenda of George W. Bush and the existence of torture jails in Europe and the abuse of American soldiers, of prisoners by American soldiers. So the foundation should therefore not be just another public diplomacy institution. It should be part of a national strategy for public diplomacy, and indeed I would argue that it could be central to form such a strategy, because this institution provides compromises actors from politics and administration, business, academia, and civil society. And then, similar to what you suggested, I would imagine that the goal of this institution would not be just to increase the image of a country. It should focus on these small projects, and then over time, when each of these projects is successful, the overall brand of the country will also increase. And I believe that such a public diplomacy foundation could solve the dilemma of who should be in charge of a nation's image, because it would really transform the way how we look at public diplomacy. It could open up the civil service and foreign office. It could make business more responsible, and it would give civil society a voice in foreign policy. I remember that when Barack Obama visited in Berlin in 2008, when he was still a presidential candidate, there were more than 200,000 people listening to his speech here at the Brandenburg Gate. So I believe that people are interested in global issues, and that they want to have the opportunity to engage in solving all the international problems that we face today. And once diplomats used to be part of an arcane community. They were carriers of secrets, worked behind closed doors, they are negotiators and whatever. Today, the job description is much more complicated. Today diplomats are expected to also engage with a much broader audience, often with a very small budget. But as I've laid out, diplomacy today is no longer something which is exclusively dominated by a small group of people. Today everybody can be a public diplomat. And the American pollster John Zogby has called the generation between 18 and 29 the first globals. And he describes them as more networked and globally engaged than members of any similar age cohort in American history. Most of the people of this generation have friends abroad and they travel more frequently than their parents. Also, many of them consider to work for some time in another country. So these people will shape the image that we have of America. And I think this is what makes the idea of a public diplomacy fund so attractive. It represents the richness of a country's civil society, the wealth of its industry, and the legitimacy of the government. The complexity of the problems that we face today mean that we cannot leave any resources untapped. So if you understand public diplomacy in that way, the only possible answer to the opening question, who owns a nation brand, is you. Thank you very much.